Welcome back. This one went hard on diet, mitochondria, and mental health connections. We also talked ketogenic diet, fasting, oxidative stress, and why some anxiety or autism links might be metabolic. I cannot believe the amount of confidence people have in just genetics when environments changed. Like if autism quadrupled in 2 decades, it's all inherited starts sounding lazy. The whole mitochondria angle feels almost too satisfying until you poke it. But hey, satisfaction is not a scientific metric, is it? What I liked is they didn't claim diet is the only cause, just that it's a unifying lever. Still, everything is metabolic triggers my skepticism bone. Because humans are messy. Trauma, sleep, screens, genetics, meds, yes, all together. But the panic attack example, the idea of dysregulation pathways firing out of nowhere, that part felt real, like anxiety can be a misfiring system, not just a thought problem. Still, I'd want to be careful. Association is not causation, even if it's suggestive. The episode basically dared people to run the diet experiment without pretending it's unethical. And it referenced big epidemiology plus animal models, ultra-processed diets linked to depression and anxiety in rodents. I'm curious how convincing that is for ADHD, though. Like they said, it's harder to measure. Because ADHD symptoms in mice is not exactly a clean translation. Yet they stitch it together through insulin resistance, mitochondrial function, and oxidative stress. And the oxidative stress framing, mitochondria generate energy but also produce stress byproducts, makes intuitive sense. But you know what worries me? The leap from mechanism to here's your cure. People love cures. Clinicians love nuance. Platforms love shortcuts. The best part was actually the no one-size-fits-all prescription line. They were like, ask what your metabolic health is, what symptoms you have, sleep, substances, medications. That immediately makes it more sane than just go keto and your brain will thank you. The keto story was the anchor, though. Doris, schizophrenia in remission after ketogenic diet and weight loss. 6 suicide attempts, then remission, then tapering psychiatric meds. Yeah, that's not subtle. I don't know anyone who hears that and stays emotionally neutral. But I also want to protect listeners from treating one case like a guarantee. They tried to ground it by noting keto was developed for seizures and is evidence-based in epilepsy. Which is wild because psychiatry medication overlap with epilepsy drugs is very real. So the logic is, if keto changes brain inflammation, neurotransmitters, gut microbiome, and mitochondrial function, maybe it impacts psych symptoms too. The mitochondria are doing the heavy lifting, and everyone else is the supporting cast. I liked the ketogenic diet mimics fasting argument too, developed to reproduce fasting state benefits without actual starvation. That said, fasting has caveats: underweight, eating disorders, severe depression, weight loss, cancer. It was one of the few parts where the message wasn't go extreme. It was be safe, supervised if needed. And the sugar piece was pretty crisp. Healthy people can have sugar occasionally, but long-term high sugar impairs mitochondrial function. The way they called out oxidative stress was basically sugar high, mitochondrial dysfunction, downstream mental disorder risk. Then caffeine, like they used the accelerator brake metaphor for energy stimulation and oxidative stress if overdone. That metaphor is so clean I almost wish it was wrong because it makes too much sense. Still, stimulant tolerance varies. Some people get wired, some people get normal, some people spiral. The autism link section was intense, obesity and diabetes doubling risk, quadrupling when both are present. And autism quadrupling rates in 20 years, someone basically said, genetics can't explain population scale change so fast. I did appreciate the careful wording against fat shaming, framing metabolic impairment as the mediating issue. Because otherwise the internet would immediately weaponize it, like always. They brought in environmental disruptors too. Pesticides, microplastics, forever chemicals, and yeah, that's plausible as a background stressor. But that's also where I'd want more measured language, since forever chemicals cause autism is too headliney. Correlation chains get long and fragile. The mechanism might be true, but the attribution can get shaky. The good news vibe stayed throughout, though. Early intervention, sleep, less screen time, human contact, routine. And the refusal to just prescribe pills for everything, like if a child sleeps poorly, start with environment and habits. That's common sense with lab-backed justification, which is honestly the best combo. We ended on a personal note, too, the lived reality of severe depression, suicidal ideation, psychosis in the family. The description of the oppressive cloud, numbness after months, then years of numbness, damn. And then the fire quote, like trying to save someone and realizing you can't, only learn and prevent others from the same despair. That closing question, being known as the person who regained hope, hit harder than the science, weirdly. All right, that's a wrap on this final episode. Thank you for sticking with us through the metabolism rabbit hole. Seriously, we hope you leave with both skepticism and tools, not just slogans. Welcome back, final episode, and we tied mental health to diet, mitochondria, and metabolism. We argued that sleep, sugar, ultra-processed foods, and even stress physiology can reshape brain function. And the wild part is how many clinicians supposedly treat diet like it's laughable. I get skepticism, but incontrovertible sounds like a mic drop, not a scientific conclusion. Still, when the data cluster around mitochondria, it's hard to hand-wave it away. Remember that panic attack for no reason idea, brain dysregulation, not just thoughts. That framing clicked for me because it treats anxiety like physiology going off script. Like your nervous system is hitting the fire alarm, but there's no smoke. And then we want to debate whether the alarm system is real or imagined. The mitochondria angle basically says metabolism is upstream of the downstream symptoms. But I want to push back. Does that mean every mental disorder is metabolic in the same way? I'd rather say metabolism is a major modulator, not the only cause. Yes, like trauma, genetics, gut microbiome, all that feed into the same engine. The show kept circling oxidative stress, too, which is a pretty unifying concept. Oxidative stress shows up in metabolic disorders and apparently also in mental health, at least correlated. Correlation is not causation, but it's still a map worth exploring. Also, the host's only 7% metabolically healthy line, either it's spot on or it's inflammatory. Either way, it motivates action, which I'm not mad at. I liked how medication wasn't dismissed, just not treated as the default hammer. Use meds if they help, but don't ignore the circuit board is honestly the vibe. And then the ketogenic story. Doris, childhood trauma, schizophrenia diagnosis, massive remission. That part is hard not to feel something about, even if you remain scientifically cautious. One case doesn't prove the mechanism, but it absolutely motivates hypotheses. The mechanism hunt was key: ketones, mitochondrial function, inflammation, epigenetics. Everyone wants the one thing, and reality is multiple levers pulled at once. Like when you try to fix your life with one app and it doesn't work. The show explicitly admitted we don't fully know what's primary in keto. That honesty felt rare. Most people sell certainty. This person kept room for uncertainty. And the keto mimics fasting explanation connected diet to a broader metabolic state shift. But fasting depends, like underweight, eating disorders, severe depression, weight loss, cancer. The caution matters because people will DIY anything that sounds powerful. Yeah, the internet loves fasting until it turns into a progressively worse situation. The show tried to frame it as safe, supervised metabolic interventions, not martyrdom. Then came caffeine and stimulants, accelerator and brake balance. That car analogy is dangerously sticky, I'll give them that. Stimulation might help when you're tired, but overdoing it can worsen oxidative stress. And they separated tea coffee from caffeine alone, which is smart because tea has extra compounds. I still want better causal evidence on caffeine causes mitochondrial dysfunction, not just plausible pathways. Same, but the don't overshoot your system advice is still practical. What really got me was autism and ADHD links via parental metabolic risk and obesity diabetes. The rates quadrupled framing in autism is the kind of claim that makes people defensive. And they correctly said it's not fat shaming. Metabolic dysfunction, genetics, environment, all tangled. Calories is too simplistic, and the show kept hammering that point. Ultra-processed foods, pesticides, microplastics, forever chemicals, that's a lot of suspects at once. Agreed, and I'd want to separate what's strongly supported from what's plausible but speculative. Still, even if only half the suspects are real, intervening on sleep and diet is low regret for many families. The child sleep section felt grounded. Screen time reduction, routine, boring bedtime stories. boring until sleepy is such a parent weapon. I also appreciated the no pills as first resort stance, especially for kids' sleep issues. Then the personal move-in story, living under an oppressive cloud of despair. Numbness after months, inability to cry for years, then self-harm attempts. Wow. That kind of lived reality is why these metabolic theories feel more than theoretical. When someone says hope changed their physiology, you can't just dismiss it politely. And the ending question, being known as the person who regained hope. That's the strongest what to be known for in the entire episode, honestly. All right, we're closing the series now. Thank you for sticking with us through this whole metabolism rabbit hole. Seriously, may you leave with skepticism plus tools, not just slogans, and we'll see you soon. Welcome back. This final episode stitches together mental health, mitochondria, and diet. We also zoomed in on hope stories, like schizophrenia remission on a ketogenic diet. The wild part is how confidently the argument ties panic, focus, and metabolism together. I'm not saying the leap is small because incontrovertible is a loud word. But yeah, when the biology framing clicks, it's hard to unsee it. Like that anxiety pathways get hyper-excitable thing. Sounds familiar to many people. It's basically your brain's panic circuit is misfiring even at home. And then the prescription isn't just meditate, it's repair the system, which is a much punchier sell than hope as a motivational poster. The mitochondria angle keeps trying to be the common denominator for everything. I like the way they connected oxidative stress to mitochondrial dysfunction, then to mental disorders. Still, I want to push back on the certainty vibe. Correlation isn't causation, ever. But sure, you can't randomize eat ultra-processed for 10 years without ethical chaos. So they lean on animal models, neuroimaging, genetics, and big epidemiology patterns. And the mitochondria theory of autism claims the rates quadrupled too fast to be just genetics. Quadrupled is such a dramatic number that it forces the environment question. But then they go from maternal obesity diabetes risk to prenatal biology to mitochondria. That pathway might be plausible, but it's also a lot of steps in one breath. Still, metabolic health predicts neurodevelopment risk is a pattern worth taking seriously. The more grounded part was actually intervene early, and don't fat shame while doing it. Yeah, please don't use autism as a bathroom scale moral test, thanks. Now, the ketogenic diet story, Doris Mildred, was honestly the episode's emotional anchor. Daily hallucinations at 17, decades of meds, then remission after 2 weeks of keto, come on. And the remission includes hallucinations and delusions, plus weight loss and tapering psychiatric meds. I'm impressed, but I also want people to remember single cases don't equal universal rules. They handled it a bit by saying, not one size fits all, but the implication still feels massive. The part they offered as mechanism was basically remove sugar carbs and force ketone-based metabolism. And then ketones change mitochondrial function, inflammation, neurotransmitters, even epigenetics. That's a lot of changes, but ketosis as a signaling state is at least a coherent idea. Still, I'd love more clarity on what percentage of improvement is diet versus quitting other stuff. The fasting analogy helped, though. Ketogenic diet mimics fasting state without starvation risks. They were careful about underweight, eating disorders, severe depression-related weight loss, cancer cachexia. That caveat saved the whole thing from becoming a TikTok dare. Then we went into oxidative stress, glucose dysregulation, and long-term mitochondrial damage. The car accelerator brake metaphor for caffeine was weirdly good, by the way. It frames caffeine as energy stimulation with potential overshoot, especially if you wreck sleep. Sleep is the one lever both camps agree on because mitochondria and circadian rhythms hate chaos. And the episode basically kept saying, don't treat symptoms with pills alone if the engine is broken. But don't swing too far either. Medication can be life-saving, and they said that explicitly. That was important. Use meds if they help and also repair the system. What about the 95% of clinicians laugh it off claim? Was that rhetorical fire or actual survey data? I'd want receipts there because medicine loves overconfident anecdotes. Yet even if that's overstated, the broader point stands, diet is underused in psychiatric practice. Especially considering how metabolically unhealthy most people are. Pre-diabetes, abnormal lipids, abdominal fat. The only 7% metabolically healthy statistic is brutal, makes you rethink baseline assumptions. And once you accept the baseline is shaky, food intervention becomes preventative medicine. That's the least sexy framing, which is why it might work. Boring prevention beats dramatic crisis care. The episode's "more tools than slogans" message is the right landing spot. Because people don't need a new religion, they need a plan they can actually follow. So for the skeptical listener, keep the curiosity, test small changes, track sleep, and don't ditch support systems. And for the hopeful one, this is the kind of story that says your physiology can shift with your inputs. Also, the ending question, being known for regaining hope, that hit harder than the science sections. That's the strongest what to be known for in the whole series, honestly. All right, that's it for this run. Thank you for hanging with us through the metabolism rabbit hole. Keep the skepticism on, keep the hope grounded, and we'll catch you in the next one. Welcome back. Final episode energy, but we're not going soft today. We connected diet, mitochondria, and mental health, then wrestled with what actually helps people change. The wild part is the claim that mental disorders are metabolic in nature. That's a big claim, though, almost sounds like a whole ideology, right? Like if you replace psychology with ketones, do we just feel smarter? But then the conversation goes, no, it's not anti-medication, and that helps. The argument was, meds can be useful, but the forever chemical imbalance story is incomplete. And then it pivots to panic attacks, how the brain supposedly becomes dysregulated for no reason. That line landed for me. Panic for no reason equals malfunction, not mystery. Okay, but malfunctioning is still a metaphor unless we can measure it consistently. Still, I like that they framed hope as repair, not blame, not moral failure. The whole mitochondria angle is basically your cells are running on software with bugs. And metabolism becomes the common plumbing for ADHD, autism, anxiety, mood stuff. The conversation hammered one thread. Ultra-processed foods and sugar can crank oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is this mitochondrial byproduct mess, right? Energy making that creates damage. But where I push back, correlation in humans is loud, causation is quiet. Yet they leaned hard on mechanisms and animal models, depression and anxiety in rodents on obesogenic diets. Rodents don't have ADHD, so we kind of translate like it's subtitles. Still, depression and anxiety measures are pretty measurable in animals, and that matters. Then the simpleton's way comparison came. Mitochondria can't deal with certain modern compounds. I mean, don't know how to deal is fuzzy. Biochemically, it's more pathway overload or interference. But I get the spirit. We're feeding an engine with weird fuel and expecting stable behavior. And the personal story in there was wild. Metabolic syndrome improving fast after switching carbs. And mental health improving faster than he thought was possible, like, wait, I can feel good? That's the kind of anecdote that makes people either dismiss it instantly or reevaluate everything. What I appreciated is they didn't say, do keto and cure your life. They kept repeating, no one-size-fits-all prescription, which is rare for diet talk. They asked about sleep, substance use, medications, so diet is one lever among many. Which is annoying because the internet prefers one lever and a dramatic before-after screenshot. Then came the extreme case study, Doris, hallucinations and delusions, schizophrenia diagnosis. Within 2 weeks, weight loss and dramatic reduction in symptoms. And then remission for years, with tapering psychiatric meds within about 6 months. I'll say it. That's remarkable, but medicine requires controls we never get in stories like that. Still, stories are data in the human sense, especially when they map onto plausible biology. The explanation offered was, ketogenic diet mimics fasting, shifts fuel to ketones, supports mitochondria. And the developed 100 years ago for seizures detail made it feel less like trend chasing. They argued psychiatry already borrows from epilepsy pharmacology, so the overlap isn't random. But keto can also be a calorie control tool. Weight loss alone could change mood and sleep. They didn't fully isolate the ketones versus weight versus reduced sugar question, though, which is fair because real life doesn't come with randomized dinners. Still, their point was that the diet forces a metabolic transition at the level of the liver and brain fuel. Ketone bodies then do more than fuel. They change inflammation, gene expression, neurotransmitters. That's why they think mitochondria repair is the unifying thread. Okay, so where do fasting and sugar fit in? Are we just swapping vocabulary? They said fasting benefits are similar. Mitochondria biology, insulin signaling, microbiome effects. But big caveat, underweight people, eating disorders, severe depression with weight loss, cancer, no fasting. That caveat mattered because it sounded like harm reduction, not hype. And for sugar, they said low intake is fine, but chronic high sugar impairs mitochondria via oxidative stress. So the enemy isn't dessert once in a while, it's the lifestyle background noise. Then caffeine got the car accelerator analogy. Stimulate metabolism but don't smash the brakes. Floor the accelerator and slam on the brake is surprisingly accurate for overdoing stimulants. They also mentioned oxidative stress can happen when stimulation overshoots and sleep suffers. That directly ties to mental health outcomes. Sleep is the most universal mental health amplifier. Now, the autism and ADHD link, mitochondrial theory, rising rates, and metabolic risk factors. The obesity-diabetes statistics doubling risk of autism in that framing was pretty intense. I'm careful here. People can weaponize these numbers for fat shaming, and they explicitly warned against that. They tried to redirect blame toward metabolic and environmental disruptions, foods, pesticides, microplastics, forever chemicals. That part felt like it had less direct proof and more possible mechanisms, but it was grounded in the metabolic thesis. Also, the emphasis on early intervention and practical household changes felt actionable. Less screen time, sleep routines, more human contact, avoid alcohol and marijuana, don't rush to pills for everything. Boring bedtime story so you get sleepy is elite parenting strategy, honestly. I laughed because it's such a simple lever that people refuse to try. And then the emotional anchor. The host talking about living with a mother in psychosis and despair. The couldn't cry for 20 years detail was brutal, self-protection becoming numbness. It reframed the whole science conversation into something personal and survival-oriented. That ending message, being known for regaining hope, was the most human thing all series. Because if this were just mitochondria talk, we'd still be stuck. But if your physiology can change with inputs, then treatment becomes a roadmap, not a verdict. So final takeaway for me, don't ditch support, don't ditch meds if needed, but don't ignore food and sleep either. That's more tools than slogans, with a little chaos and a lot of hope. All right, series wrap. Thanks for hanging with us through the metabolism rabbit hole. Keep the skepticism on, keep the hope grounded, and we'll catch you next time. Welcome back. This episode went full metabolism to mind pipeline. We talked mitochondria, panic, diet, and even ketogenic diet remission stories. But the part that hit me hardest was the panic attack for no reason framing. Like, does the brain malfunction, or are we just labeling stress poorly? I love the word dysregulated. It sounds scientific, but also oddly honest. If anxiety pathways are hyper-excitable, diet could be upstream wiring changes. And then suddenly people stop acting like food is some wellness side quest. The show's stance was mental disorders are metabolic in nature, right? Which is brave because most clinicians hear that and laugh. But I also get it. Medicine gets roasted when people oversell cures. Still, the evidence angle was neuroimaging, genetics, trauma, neurotransmitters, stacked. And the diet intervention equals hope theme kept recurring like a baseline. The personal story was wild. Metabolic syndrome fixed, mood improved fast. Going from low-fat processed stuff to low-carb, and suddenly he's confident and energetic. That's the kind of before-after that makes skeptics either argue or audit their life. My favorite line was basically, mitochondria don't know what to do with junk. And the hypothesis tied ultra-processed foods, oxidative stress, and mitochondrial dysfunction together. I'm with you that it's not just calories in, calories out, though. But I want guardrails. Incontrovertible sounds too clean for biology. True, but the show also used might and scientist in me caveats, so it's not a crusade. Okay, practical question. What diet actually gets prescribed in real life? The answer was no one-size-fits-all, because mental health and metabolic health differ. Which is fair, because your mitochondria need context, not generic internet recipes. Then there was that anxiety for normal reasons pushback. Like, if you're facing real stakes, stress isn't pathology, it's adaptive signaling. That distinction matters because otherwise you medicalize everything that makes you human. And then they zoomed out, long-term ultra-processed diets raising depression and anxiety risk. I'm always cautious with animal-to-human leaps, but the direction consistency is notable. The show also connected mental disorders to obesity, insulin resistance, and Alzheimer risk. The percentages were big, like obesity doubling autism risk, and puberty weight gain spiking depression. Those stats are so spicy that you immediately want to check the citations. But even without worshiping numbers, the unifying thread was metabolism. And that leads to the extreme case, Doris, schizophrenia remission on keto. Like daily hallucinations at 17, multiple attempts, then within 2 weeks, dramatic reduction. The word miraculous floated in the conversation, but it still sounded clinical. The recovery included tapering anti-psych meds in about 6 months. Huge. Still, I need to hear close clinician supervision because stories can become dangerously motivational. The episode did say meds aren't opposed, and treatment can be layered, not replaced. Then the deeper keto explanation, remove sugar and shift to ketone-fueled brain metabolism. And the liver turning fat into ketone bodies, fuel and signaling molecules for mitochondria. So it's not keto magic, it's metabolic transition mediated by mitochondria. But they also admitted the exact mechanism isn't fully understood, which I respected. Because if they'd nailed it perfectly, we'd all be selling ketone subscriptions tomorrow. The fasting angle was also interesting. Ketogenic diet as fasting mimicology. But fasting has caveats. Underweight, eating disorders, severe depression-related weight loss, cancer. Yeah, fasting advice online is already reckless enough. This part needed the warnings. Then sugar. Oxidative stress as mitochondria's output, and oxidative stress as damage amplifier. Again, I'm not against nuance. Moderate sugar can be fine for metabolically healthy people. But with most people not metabolically healthy, high sugar over time becomes a slow-risk engine. That accelerator and brake analogy for caffeine was actually memorable. Caffeine blocks adenosine, so it can energize, but overdoing it might add oxidative stress. I love that it's not pure villainy. Coffee can be a daily tool, but sleep is the governor. That sleep piece ties back to everything: mitochondria, stress systems, and emotional regulation. Then they brought autism and ADHD directly into mitochondrial theory. Controversial, but clear. I get the logic, but the autism causality part will make people furious or intrigued. The claim was that autism rates quadrupled in 2 decades, so environment must be shifting too. Genetic doesn't explain quadrupling as cleanly, fair point to interrogate. The episode also pushed back hard on fat shaming, saying obesity is a metabolic marker, not moral failure. And it broadened to pesticides, microplastics, forever chemicals, metabolism disruptors. I liked the practical early intervention suggestions too. Sleep routine, reduce screen time, human contact. Avoid pills for everything can be good as a direction, but it's not universally safe. Still, the core was, try low-risk behavioral and nutritional levers first, safely and under guidance. And then the real gut punch, the host's childhood watching his mother's psychosis and despair. The inability to cry for years, then suicidality, people underestimate that kind of collapse. That story anchored the hope message. Change can happen, even when you've given up. Which loops back perfectly to mitochondria as a repairable system, not a life sentence. Like, if physiology can respond to inputs, treatment is a roadmap, not a verdict. Final takeaway for me, keep meds where needed, but don't ignore food and sleep. That's more tools than slogans, and it's messy in the best way. All right, series wrap. Thanks for hanging with us through the metabolism rabbit hole. Keep skepticism on, keep hope grounded, and we'll catch you next time. Welcome back. This is the final one, and we stitched diet to brain biology. We went from panic and ADHD-style regulation to ketosis, mitochondria, and even autism risk. What I still can't get over is the for-no-reason panic attack framing. Like, if your brain is deregulated, the fear circuits fire without an obvious threat. But I want to push a little. Does malfunctioning sound too absolute to you? Because humans love absolutes, and biology loves exceptions. Fair, but the hopeful part is that repair is even conceivable in that model. Exactly. If mitochondria can be nudged, then therapy isn't just vibes. It's here's the lever and maybe the wiring changes. So when you hear metabolic in nature, do you feel convinced or just intrigued? Intrigued, but also, the clinician in me hears 95% laughable and winces. I get it though, people hate diet cures bloodhound energy. Because every cousin with a blender has an opinion. Still, the through line was pretty consistent: metabolism, oxidative stress, mitochondria. And then suddenly it's not food affects mood, it's food affects cellular state. That's why the mitochondria thing lands, because it's not just sugar or calories, it's function. The car accelerator analogy was honestly decent, by the way. Floor accelerator, slam brakes, got it, my cells hate mixed instructions. But I'd still ask where caffeine fits without becoming another everything in moderation poster. The point felt practical. Too much stimulation could tilt mitochondria toward oxidative stress. And then sugar is basically the long-term saboteur, not the birthday cake villain. Yeah, one slice versus a lifestyle of high sugar spikes isn't the same game. What really grabbed me was the ketogenic diet history. Seizures first, psychiatry second. Because if it helps epilepsy, there's already a precedent that brain metabolism matters. The question I kept having, is it removing carbs or adding ketones or both? And you know people will fight about gluten, protein, micronutrients forever. Like it's a food courtroom show. Objection, gluten. Objection, B12. The argument was that ketosis forces a metabolic transition mediated by mitochondria. And that transition supposedly rewires neurotransmitters, inflammation, gut microbiome, even epigenetics. That's a lot of outputs for one input, which makes me want to see stronger causal proof. But then the case story is what anchors the could part in lived reality. Doris, hallucinations, delusions, multiple suicidality attempts, then remission on keto. 2 weeks to weight loss and dramatic reduction in psychotic symptoms, that timeline is wild. Wild doesn't equal universal, and I hope listeners keep that distinction. Otherwise, we're one podcast away from just keto, bro, no therapist required. The conversation actually resisted that by emphasizing not one size fits all. I liked that the dietary prescription starts with the person: sleep, meds, substances, symptoms. And for you, the anxiety you described wasn't disaster, it was an adaptive stress response. That distinction matters: normal alertness versus pathological hyperexcitation. Otherwise, every uncomfortable feeling becomes a diagnosis and we all spiral. Then the long game idea kicked in. Chronic ultra-processed eating increases risk, likely via metabolic disruption. Epidemiology plus animal models showing depression and anxiety changes on obesogenic diets. I'll be honest, linking that to ADHD, autism, bipolar, schizophrenia feels like a chain of associations. The unifying thread was metabolism, and the claim was it's incontrovertible. Do you buy incontrovertible, or do you read it as best current synthesis? Because science loves certainty until it meets real life. The autism section was also careful about fat shaming, which I appreciated. The point being, obesity and diabetes reflect mitochondrial metabolic stress that might affect neurodevelopment. And pregnancy, infection, and other environmental insults complicate timing and expression, which loops back to early intervention: sleep, less screen time, human contact, no alcohol or marijuana. Avoid pills for everything that ails you is a strong stance, though the intent is sensible caution. Safety matters, especially with sleep and kids. The vibe should be try behavioral first, not never medicate. And fasting. Ketosis mimics fasting state, but underweight and eating disorder folks should not do that unsupervised. That caveat made the whole fasting conversation more credible. Honestly, the mitochondria theory plus real-world boundaries is the healthiest version of this message. Because hope without safety rails becomes another harm story. And we ended with that personal piece, the inability to cry, numbness, then eventual rescue. It reframed the whole series from mental illness is fate to biology is plastic. Not plastic like your phone case, more like repairable circuitry. So yeah, meds where needed, food and sleep where possible, and realism about fit. That's the messy toolkit we're leaving you with, because brains and bodies don't care about slogans. All right, that's it for this series. Thank you for hanging with us through the metabolism rabbit hole. Keep skepticism on, keep hope grounded, and we'll catch you in the next episode.